All right, chat. So I'm a little late to the game on this one, but I wanted to comment on it myself because at first, when I first heard about this, I kind of thought like they may be onto something, and then like as time went on and more information came out, I kind of started to think that this was like something that was overblown. And I think for some aspects of the internet, this kind of became like a transphobia thing where people were targeting like a trans creator and trying to kick them while they're down. And I'll kind of explain it as we go along. But essentially, there was this content creator known as RileyCS who got banned on Twitch because they were posting clips of them playing Battlefield 6, and a lot of people believed they were cheating. Now, I tried to find the original clip compilation that people were questioning, and I wasn't able to find the original clip compilation, but here's an example of one of their clips. And a lot of people was looking at these clip compilations and saying some stuff here doesn't make a lot of sense. They're shooting someone in smoke that's not even visible and they're able to kill them. They're snapping really quickly to enemies in a way that seems unnatural. They're aiming at targets who are behind walls and stuff like that. And they're like, this looks really sus. This looks like this person is cheating. And I gotta be honest, when I first saw the initial clips, even though I never publicly commented on it, when I first saw the initial clips, I thought, okay, maybe there's some truth to this. Maybe this person is cheating or whatever, right? And then what was really odd about this is just as much people that were coming out, big names that were coming out to call them out for cheating, there were also multiple big names that were coming out in defense of them. People who were game developers, people who actually created these aimbot tools. There were people who are competitive, like aim training streamers and stuff like that were coming out to defend them. Like very noteworthy people came out to say this person is not cheating. So at that point, I started to like question it. And I noticed that a lot of the people, not everybody, to be clear, not everybody, but there was a significant amount of people who, after these big names came out to defend them and support them, there was a significant and noteworthy amount of people who continued to push the cheating allegations that were very like transphobic in nature. They were shitting on the fact that they were trans. They were intentionally like misgendering them, shit like that. The normal things you'd see on social media that you associate with transphobia. And again, I want to make it clear that I don't necessarily think that everybody who continued to believe that this person was cheating is transphobic. But I do think that there was a substantial amount of people who were pushing the cheating allegations, like a noteworthy amount of people who were pushing the cheating allegations, who might have had, an alternative agenda in regards to their trans identity. But in any case, I wanted to comment on this now. I waited because I was waiting to see somebody who had like good analysis of like cheating allegations and stuff like that when it came to gaming communities. Take a look at it. And the person who ended up doing that, and I noticed that they were having some, conversations about this on social media and even engagements with RileyCS that they were looking to cover this, was Carl Jobs. And I have watched this video and I thought their analysis was pretty good. Now, I understand, I want to preface this by saying, I understand a lot of people have criticism of Carl right now because of what happened with the Billy Mitchell, lawsuit and the fact that Carl Jobs lost the lawsuit and stuff like that. And look, I think it's valid to be critical of, how that lawsuit played out and the fact that Carl lost and the fact that Carl wasn't exactly fully transparent with the reason the lawsuit was taking place, that it wasn't about cheating allegations, that it was about his claims about Billy Mitchell and Apollo Legend. I think there's valid criticism to be had there. Carl's a friend of mine, and I've shared this criticism with him privately myself in the past. That said, they still do very good analysis of video game cheating allegations. And so I wanted to see what they had to say about it, and I thought they did a pretty good video about it. So we're going to take a look at it here. Did that person block you on Twitter? Looks like they have. Yeah, I noticed that while like researching this topic, that RileyCS has me blocked on Twitter. And I don't know why. It doesn't really matter, ultimately. Like, I still stand by my personal defense of them. But yeah, for some reason, they have me blocked on Twitter, and I have no fucking clue why. I've literally never interacted with them ever before. So, kind of odd, but, it's no big deal. It is what it is. But anyway, let's go ahead and let's take a look at Carl Jobs' video and see what he has to say. This is the most divisive cheating scandal in history by Carl Jobs. Let's fucking go.
Hello, you absolute legends. For the past week and a half, there has been an insane battle raging on Twitter. On the 9th of August, the gamer RileyCS posted a Battlefield 6 montage, and it's crazy. The aim is unbelievable. She quickly snaps back and forth between targets with the kind of ease and precision that is hard to take seriously. And at one point, she even snaps to a target that is hidden behind a giant rock. This gameplay has all the hallmarks of cheating: inhuman quickness when switching targets, snapping to enemies outside of her field of view, and even locking onto enemies behind objects. This seems like it's obviously fake, and it didn't take long for this to blow.
Yeah, see, like, that's why even when I initially looked at the footage, like I said, I didn't publicly comment on it. But like when I initially saw the footage, I too thought, okay, like it looks like they're cheating. Like there's a lot of things here that, like, when you've seen people be accused of cheating in the past, these seem like a staple of like cheating allegations when it comes to like FPS games. So even I kind of thought it at first, like, yeah, it looks like she might be cheating.
Blow up.
I don't know, with how dishonest Carl has been, I'll need substantial evidence for him to claim he makes, for any claim he makes to buy it. And I do think that he presents some good arguments here. Like, if you were to have like another creator make these exact same arguments, I think that you'd be pretty comfortable in saying that he makes a good faith argument in this situation. But who knows? Maybe you'll disagree with me.
With hugely followed content creators retweeting Riley's post, calling out the fact that it's blatant cheating. And when I say this montage blew up, I really mean it.
I'm very unhappy with Nirana over this. She's assuming everyone that questioned this cheating is transphobic. Good job calling transgender people just transphobic, I guess. That's why I said, like, I don't necessarily believe that everybody who believes that RileyCS is cheating is transphobic. But if you look on social media, you quickly see that there are quite a few people that will, like, be transphobic while calling them out as a cheater. Like, they'll intentionally use he instead of she when calling them a cheater. Or they'll be like, that's a man, and yes, they cheated. You know, the typical things you see with transphobia. There's a lot of that going on, especially on Twitter.
Mean it.
I mean, I think you can even find it in the comment section of this video. Let me see if I can find an example here. Wonder why this clip. Carl, she, Asmongold, he, oh. So there's an example of somebody referencing it. Trying to find, sorry chat, I'm not a good skimmer, but I'm pretty comfortable in saying, like, when I checked out this comment section when the video came out, there was a lot of references to he, that's a man, etc. But yeah, anyway.
It has almost 100 million views, and I can't recall a single cheating scandal that has had this much attention, period. What's interesting is that
Alice of Fiction says, I love how hard you ride for the trans community. Yeah, because, like, as a member of, like, the queer community, I care a lot about, you know, the rights of fellow queer people, whether they're gay, whether they're lesbian, whether they're trans, you know, whether they're pansexual or non-binary like myself, it doesn't matter. I do genuinely care about the rights of fellow queer people. That doesn't necessarily mean that, like, it's impossible for, like, trans people to do anything wrong, that they're not criticizable, and that it's fine to criticize them when they do engage in, like, bad behavior, or, like, in this situation, if they genuinely were a cheater. But having said that, like, I just think it's insane. Like, when you see a controversy like this, if you truly feel that RileyCS is a cheater, that's fine. You can call them a cheater. You can criticize them for what you believe to be cheating. That's totally fair. But why you got to be transphobic about it too? Like, at that point, I start to think that your motives for pushing the cheating allegations aren't just about the cheating. Like, maybe there's something else going on there when you feel the incessant need to be like, that's a man, and yeah, they cheated. You know what I mean?
Is that in spite of this obviously fake montage,
like, not all members of the LGBTQ community are always in solidarity with other members of the community, but, like, I happen to be one of those people that are. I do stand in solidarity with my fellow brothers, sisters, and NBs in the LGBTQ community.
Riley has a ton of support. In one corner, you have the large content creators proclaiming that this is the most obvious example of cheating ever, and in the other corner, you have a ton of professional gamers and highly skilled.
WEF says, God forbid reality gets acknowledged. Are you serious? What exactly do you mean when you say that reality gets acknowledged? I'd like to understand what you mean, because if you're expecting me to be a creator who covers drama and is just going to be edgy and is just going to like, make fun of people who are trans and stuff like that, if that's the sort of thing that you're expecting, you're in the wrong fucking chat, my guy. Because we don't allow people in my community to engage in transphobic behavior. So if that's what you're trying to do here, you can see yourself on out, or one of the mods will see you out. I will biologically okay, you don't even know how to English properly. Will biologically reality for one. Learn how to English, my guy. And I think this is satire, and I just stumbled upon a funny joke. Okay, chat, can somebody get rid of the transphobe in my chat? Because we don't do that shit here. Can one of the mods, like, dispose of them, please? Thank you.
Skilled aimers saying that it's legit, and both—
We don't do transphobia in my community, bro. So, like, if that's what you want to do, you can see yourself the fuck on out. Peace, bitch.
corners have massive amounts of proponents. So not only does this seem to have garnered the most amount of attention out of any scandal I can recall, but it also appears to be the most divisive. And what's perplexing is that for all intents and purposes, RileyCS is a relative nobody, who appears to have just uploaded a montage of herself using an aimbot in unranked Battlefield 6 beta games, a game in which apparently over 300,000 other people have already been banned for cheating.
Lol, it's so funny. It's so funny that the non-binary pansexual guy would stand up in support of the trans people. That's so funny, guys. It's an obvious joke, right? Fucking clown.
So this really shouldn't even be a story, and yet, here we are. Unfortunately, regardless of whether or not RileyCS is actually cheating, I immediately realized there is a lot of misinformation being spread. So I figured that if you're going to have such a strong opinion either way, it should be based on correct information. So today—
See, I didn't even know, like, as I said, I have pre-watched this video, so I know some of the arguments he's going to make, and we'll cover them as we go along. But as somebody who's not super knowledgeable in these types of games, like, as I admitted before, even I thought that there was a good chance that they might actually be cheating. And then when people started to defend them, I started to notice little things that didn't make sense to me. Like in the past, when I've seen people who are accused of cheating, like when they're like aiming at people who are through walls and stuff like that, typically you'll see them like directly locked on to like the enemy. And I started noticing little things, like there was the one where like, oh, she was able to aim at a character that's behind a rock or something like that. And I noticed that like if you actually analyze the footage frame for frame, at no point whatsoever is she directly aimed at the person behind the rock. Like at one point she's slightly to the left, and at another point she's slightly to the right. So like there never is this actual moment of like locking directly onto a target the way that some people were describing. But even so, like while I noticed little things like that, I didn't know the defensives that Carl was going to present in this video, and he actually presents some pretty good ones.
Today, we are going to debunk the biggest myths and misconceptions around this quote-unquote cheating scandal.
Honestly, he says, I've followed Tipster for many years. He's always been very supportive of us. That's the crazy thing I noticed when I was like in the crosshairs of the community and people were saying that I was just like grifting to try and get close to trans women or something like that. Because not only has there never been a trans woman who's come forward and said that I try to like, creep on them or hit on them or like engage in any kind of like what would be considered like chaser behavior or anything like that. But also I've always been supportive of like queer rights and queer communities. Even before I joined these communities myself and came out myself, I guess people just weren't paying attention before, or they were just being dishonest and pretended like me being supportive of those communities was a thing that just didn't exist. Like, I will admit I'm more vocal now, obviously. But yeah, like, I've always been supportive of, like, queer communities, and just people dishonestly represented it as if, like, this is, like, a totally new thing for me. But I don't know.
Scandal. I really hope you enjoy. Now, legends, you could win this incredible, one-of-a-kind—
Okay, I love you, Carl, but your sponsor's not paying me, so we're skipping it. Let's skip the sponsor chat. Here we go.
Before going into the details, we have to be honest. These clips don't pass the smell test. To any reasonable observer, they appear to be fake. So I would not fault anyone for thinking that
this cheating scandal happens to everyone every 5 years. It used to be to target cis women. It happened a lot to cis women for sure. Like there were a lot of women who would be falsely accused of like cheating or whatever, just because, certainly there could never be a woman that's good at video games. That's not to say that every allegation that's ever came out wasn't true. Like, I'd say there's some pretty compelling evidence that was used for against SS Sniper Wolf back in the day, about like her like accounts being boosted and stuff like that to get her higher up in the ranks. And I've definitely seen instances of like men being accused of cheating as well. But yeah, that was like a pretty common thing looking back in the day, where like a lot of women would get accused of cheating, and it's just like, when you really look at it in hindsight, a lot of the evidence used against them was just like baloney.
That Riley
But again, that's not to say that there haven't been like legitimate pieces of evidence used against someone to prove that they're cheating. But yeah.
is cheating. However, just because something appears to be fake to a reasonable observer, that doesn't mean it is. This isn't proof. As someone who has been in the speedrunning community for over 25 years, I can tell you from experience, there was a time that whenever a casual viewer watched a speedrun, they would say it's fake. The most famous example being Super Mario Bros., where the world record runs would get flooded with comments from people saying Mario should have been killed by a piranha plant. Nowadays, people
I do see that a lot in the early days of speedrunning, and even still now sometimes you'll see that, where like somebody who doesn't understand the inner workings of the game the way that like speedrunners do, they'll see some crazy like stunt that some speedrunner will pull, and they'll be like, that's cheating. Maybe the person accusing someone of cheating doesn't understand the hitboxes of the enemies, so it looks like, you know, in this case Mario's coming in contact with an enemy and it should have killed him. It's like, well, no, the hitbox isn't big enough, so they haven't come in contact with a hitbox. Or maybe they'll see some player pull off like a crazy like glitch that allows them to like get like through half the game in a millisecond, and like they'll look at that and be like, that's cheating. And it's like, no, that's perfectly within the rules of speedrunning. But yeah.
People are a lot more knowledgeable about speedruns, so this comes up a lot less often. But let me give you one more speedrunning example that might relate to this RileyCS situation. This is Suiji, playing Super Mario 64. He is the greatest SM64 speedrunner of all time, and this is the world record in the 120-star category. So we have the greatest player playing the greatest speedrun, and it takes him around 38 seconds to collect this star. Now watch this clip of a different person getting that same star. Not only does this look stupid and fake, but it's 17 seconds quicker. So the obvious question should be, if this is real, why doesn't this person have the world record? They are clearly a better player just based on this comparison. You can see how this thought process might seem a bit silly in this context. Obviously, the player who did this insane strategy, known as Gib, just grinded this star for a long time to get that one clip. And while they obviously have an incredible amount of skill, this one clip isn't indicative of how they would perform in a full game run, where you need...
Yeah, because like, if you don't know a lot about speedruns, there's like different categories for speedrunning. You'll have some people who will have like a world record for completing a game like as quickly as possible without glitching. Then you'll have other like speedrunners who will like utilize glitches to beat the game quicker. Or you'll have other people who do level speedruns, so they'll speedrun how quickly they can complete a specific level or something like that. So there's different categories. So just because like one person might attain a specific star in like a level speedrun category, like how quickly can you get this particular star, it doesn't necessarily mean that same person can complete like a full completion of the game speedrun quicker than somebody who doesn't utilize the same strategies in like level specific speedruns. Does that make sense?
You need to be consistent. And what's funny is that Gib doesn't even have a full game speedrun submitted. He specializes entirely on single stars.
So if you don't understand why he's like showing this, the thing that he's trying to set up, and you'll see in a second here, is that, you know, people who are looking at the RileyCS gameplay, they're looking at it from the perspective of somebody who's supposedly good at playing competitive FPS games. But the problem with that argument when it comes to RileyCS is we're not talking about a player who's good at specifically playing FPS games competitively. We're looking at a player who's supposedly good at aiming specifically. And if you don't understand what the distinction is, there's two different communities when it comes to FPS, when it comes to like competitive gaming on FPS. There's the people who are good at playing competitive FPS, right? They're just good at the games in general. And then there's the aim training community, which is specifically good at aiming at targets. And it turns out that RileyCS is a part of the aim training community. Okay? So their playstyles are very different. So someone who's good at FPS in general might look at someone who's good at aim training, and they might think their footage is kind of sus, just because while these two players have like a certain skill that they excel at, it doesn't necessarily mean those two skills, overlap with each other. Does that make sense?
Speedruns.
Like somebody who's a competitive FPS player, they might play more like defensively. They might try to use cover when trying to navigate their way through the map while picking off enemies and stuff like that. Whereas somebody who's an aim trainer, they're going to specifically run out into a crowd of enemies, something that somebody who's good at FPS wouldn't typically do, because their goal is to pick off as many targets as possible, as opposed to trying to maximize their kill to death ratio. Does that make sense?
If I see somebody that's that good at FPS, why aren't you playing that? Why have you never played on any team? Why aren't you on like a Valorant team? Why aren't you playing professionally, competitively? Why isn't that happening?
If you think Riley's clips indicate that she is good at FPS, so good that she should be a professional player, then you don't understand what makes someone good at FPS.
Exactly.
If these clips are legitimate, the only thing they demonstrate is that she has good aim. But how reliable is aim as a predictor of a person's overall skill in FPS? Well, luckily, we have a real-world experiment that tells us. In 2023, Red Bull hosted an event called Ready Check, which was a competition based solely around aim. Competitors played various scenarios which only measured their ability to aim with a mouse. They had 8 people who qualified, and they put them against 8
You need connections to be professional and join a team. It's not even just that. It's that somebody who's like a competitive Call of Duty player has a different skill set than somebody who's good at aim training. Right? Like I said before, like somebody who's good at aim training, their goal is specifically to pick off as many targets as possible in a short period of time. Whereas somebody who's like a good, professional Call of Duty player, they're going to possess skills like being able to cooperate with a team, being able to utilize cover so that they can maximize their kill death ratio, being able to wisely pick when to pick off a target and when to back off, etc., etc. There's so much more that goes into being a competitive Call of Duty or a competitive Battlefield or a competitive Valorant, etc., FPS player, as opposed to just being good at aim training.
esports professionals, which were invited by Red Bull. You would think the esports pros would win easily. I mean, it's their profession, but the results might shock you. In every single round, the lowest scoring non-professional scored higher than the highest scoring professional. The best aimer out of the pros couldn't beat the worst aimer out of the amateurs. This was an in-person LAN event, so there was no chance for aimbots or hacks. The pros got stomped. So do pros just suck at aiming? If these other players are so good at aiming, why aren't they pro? Well, it's because there is a lot more to being a pro than just having good aim. You need to have
IL speedruns can take way bigger risks than full game runs. Twilight Princess Force Temple, no save and quit literally makes the rest of the game unbeatable because of the strats they use. Interesting. I've never really checked out Twilight Princess speedruns. I'll have to take a look at some of those. Most of the runs I watch are like, the more popular games, your Ocarina of Times, your Mario 64s, your original Mario Brothers. And then the big ones I really keep track of is like Resident Evil speedrunners, because not only am I a fan of speedrunning, but I also obviously am a big fan of the Resident Evil games. So watching speedrunners beat my favorite games as quickly as possible is like super fun. But yeah.
Excellent game awareness, problem-solving ability, good communication, leadership, teamwork, the ability to predict.
See, they talk about all these skills that like a competitive Call of Duty or like Valorant or like Battlefield, etc. player have, that somebody who just masters aim training, those are not skills that they would necessarily possess.
Enemy behavior, the ability to handle pressure, being a likable person that people want to be on a team with, and many more skills that have nothing to do with aiming. And all of these skills take time to practice and develop. So while the pros might have a laundry list of around 10 things they need to excel at, an amateur who solely practices aim is going to be a better aimer. But this simply does not translate to overall gaming ability. The winner of Ready Check, Maddie, who is basically the undisputed GOAT of aiming, even admitted he just doesn't care about the other aspects of gameplay.
Before we get into this specific performance, tell me a bit about how you got into the aim training community and becoming even a coach at that.
I originally got into aim training to get good at Overwatch. I'm not gonna lie, I was hard stuck like Diamond Masters before I got into aim training, and I was like, I want to get better aim, and I want to get better at Overwatch. But the more I played aim training, the more I realized like I'm really good at this, and I don't want to really focus that much on getting better at Overwatch and other aspects of the game. I want to aim train.
Riley is someone who
So see, there are people who are like really passionate about like aim training. Like you can take that with like any type of game, and there might be people who I'll use myself as an example, right? Like I just admitted I'm a big fan of the Resident Evil games. I've played the large majority of the games in the franchise, and I play them fairly well. There's been people in my chat who've watched me play, and I'm a pretty good player at these games. Having said that, you couldn't compare my gameplay to somebody who speedruns the game because they have a very niche skill that I may not necessarily have. I've tried my hand at speedrunning before, and I'm able to beat the games fairly quickly to a point that I'm satisfied with, but I could not compete on like a speedrunning level because they just have a skill that I don't have. Even though I've been playing these games since 1996 at the very beginning, I don't possess the same skill that a speedrunner of the Resident Evil games has, that someone like me who's just really good at genuine, like, normally playing the games would have. Does that make sense?
someone who specializes in aiming. She has over 1,500 hours in the Kovacs aim trainer alone. She is on a team that specializes in aiming. If her aim is better than esports pros, that doesn't mean she could be a pro herself. There are no delusions of grandeur here. These clips are not supposed to show that Riley is amazing at FPS. In fact, just based on the gameplay itself, it's terrible. If you tried to play like this on a pro team, not only would you get kicked immediately, but the other team members should be insulted. In this clip,
yeah, it's a common thing, like, where, like, if you're on a team with, like, competitive Call of Duty players, whether it's a pro team or just people who take the game pretty seriously when it comes to, like, a competitive level, if you're, like, a run-and-gun player, they're going to get pissed at you and they're going to kick you from the game or they're going to kick you from the team because that is not very team-friendly gameplay. Whereas somebody who's like an aim trainer, they're literally going to run out into, a field full of enemies, and they're going to do exactly that. They're going to run and gun. So like somebody who's good at aim training, like RileyCS is, they're not going to be good for competitive team-based play because of the fact that they play very differently than a competitive team-based player would play. Does that make sense, chat?
Riley clearly sees several opponents, and yet doesn't engage or take cover. She completely ignores them and runs right out into the open. This is because she doesn't care about playing well, or playing effectively, or even winning. She just wants to get a good clip, and it would look really cool if she ran out into the middle of these group of players and took them all out, like some kind of action hero, which she does. This is an entirely different style of play. Once inside the group of enemies, it basically just becomes a target switch scenario in an aim trainer, which...
Yeah, because like Carl says here, not only are they trying to get like clips, but they're also trying to get as many kills on the board as possible. They might get a lot of deaths in the process of trying to get those kills, but they just want that high kill count. That's what they're going for because they're trying to pick off as many targets as possible to utilize the knowledge that they've obtained while aim training.
Which aimers are experts at. But the only reason this would ever work is if the other players were complete scrubs and you got incredibly lucky. Obviously, in this case, the enemy wasn't paying attention, or they just suck. If you tried to do this against good players, you would get destroyed every time. In order to farm these clips, Riley has to intentionally ignore enemies, run out into the open, and pray she doesn't get spotted and killed while she attempts to chain a bunch of kills together by target switching. And indeed, even against scrubs, Riley gets killed way more often than not trying to get into these positions. These clips aren't indicative of what happens the vast majority of the time. These are highlights from hours of play. It's a selfish way of playing. And the only point is to grind for hours and hours to get a few good clips that would look cool in a montage. This is why the only thing these clips demonstrate is good aim. And Riley would fail at every other metric that makes a pro, at least based on these clips. When you watch...
I mean, that's the craziest thing about it, right? Is like you have these people accusing like RileyCS of cheating to get some like unfair competitive edge. Meanwhile, if you actually watch her gameplay, like she's dying all the time. She's engaging in behavior that's very anti-competitive. Like if you look at the bigger picture, if you just look at the clips, like it looks bad. Okay, it looks like she might be cheating or whatever. But if you look at the bigger picture, it becomes very apparent that like okay, this isn't cheating. This is just somebody playing in a very anti-competitive way. And like they're clearly getting like a handful of clips where they are able to get like some quick rapid succession kills that look kind of cool in a clip montage. But like their overall live streamed gameplay, like they're dying like left and right.
You watch a professional who is trying to play effectively and efficiently, it's completely different. They take cover. They don't just run out into the middle of a group of enemies. It's a lot more strategic, and most importantly, it's a lot.
I like this example of using Shroud because Shroud is somebody who's very competitive at FPS. And look at the difference between his gameplay and RileyCS's gameplay. RileyCS is running into a crowd of enemies to try and pick them off, like, you know, one by one to try and get some quick flick kills. But meanwhile, you've got like Shroud here taking cover, only taking the opportunity to pick off an enemy when like it's actually like a good safe bet. You know, they're playing very defensively as opposed to Riley where they're like putting themselves in a lot of danger in hopes of getting some quick kills.
A lot more effective. And to be fair, I understand where a lot of people are coming from, and I understand the disdain for this kind of montage. If you believe that Riley is trying to prove that she is some kind of battlefield savant, that would be really pathetic and cringe. If you are under the impression that these clip montages are supposed to suggest that Riley is better than professionals, that would also be pathetic.
Constant different skill sets breed different results. Exactly. It's a very different style of play between somebody who's an aim trainer and somebody who's like an actual competitive FPS gamer.
But it's not the case. These montages are purely a form of artistic expression, and nothing more. They aren't supposed to suggest anything.
But I don't... when you have people that are perceptually very, very good players, but they're not entering competitions and they're not winning competitions, I generally assume that they're probably cheaters.
These clips do not suggest that Riley is good at FPS. They only demonstrate that she has good aim, and having really good aim is what happens when you specialize in having good aim. In fact, many people who are not professionals have far better aim than most pros. But at the end of the day, when it comes to competitive esports, that really doesn't mean much. It's the equivalent of a Taekwondo exhibition. Sure, it looks cool, and it takes a lot of skill, but try it in a real fight and you'll learn pretty quickly that flashy kicks just don't work against a competent opponent.
That's a perfect example. That is a perfect fucking example. Another example you can use is like somebody who's like a professional wrestler. Like obviously professional wrestling is very scripted and choreographed, but it looks like some of the moves that they pull off like could be potentially brutal in like a real fight. Like when somebody power bombs someone into a ring, they're really throwing that person to the ground with extreme force, right? But like if somebody who's a professional wrestler gets into a real life fight, they're probably going to get their ass kicked. Like we actually seen that example with like Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels got his ass kicked in a, I think it was like a bar fight with a bunch of Marines or whatever. Meanwhile, he's like an insane top performer in the ring as a professional wrestler. But like just because like he pulls off some moves that seem really impressive in the ring, it doesn't mean that he's going to be able to like really kick someone's ass in real life. So yeah, this is like a perfect example.
And if anything, they will just get you into a world of trouble.
They snapped to a player through a wall and traced their movement through a wall.
This is the funniest one to me, because if you actually pay close enough attention to this particular clip, when I first saw it, I thought, oh yeah, it looks like they are snapping to an enemy or whatever. But if you actually pay close enough attention, let me see if I could find, because I was arguing with somebody on Twitter about this. Twitter.com. I actually did like an illustration of how that's inaccurate. Let me see. Where is this? Can I find this? Right here. Look at this. So I was arguing with somebody on Twitter because they said that the most compelling evidence that they saw was the fact that, they locked onto somebody through a wall. So here's where the alleged target is. I drew a straight line to illustrate the line of contact for this particular target. And like at the start of the clip, if you track this frame for frame, she's not locked on, right? Here's the target, this green line, and the red line is where she's aiming. So when you typically see somebody who's using an aimbot and they're like locked on to a target, like it'll be spot on, right? Like obviously this little dot right here isn't representative of the actual location of the enemy. That hovers above their head. So like they would be somewhere like below that marker, right? But here's the line of contact for like the enemy, and here's where like RileyCS is aiming. It's off by like a handful of pixels, right? And like even if you were to go back a few frames, they're too far to the left. So like this, oh, they locked onto a target through the wall, or the rock rather, it's just not true. But anyway, let's listen to like Carl explain this one.
And the internet is coping so hard, they said,
Stone Games Detective, you're using aimbot. Yeah, and Battlefield has actually banned like a shit ton of people who've used some form of cheats, including aimbot. I think the last reported number was like 300,000 accounts have been banned in association with cheating. So even that is a bit of a defense in RileyCS's regard. The fact that her account hasn't been banned. Meanwhile, like, you know, they're doing a pretty good job of banning cheaters in the game.
you know there's a mini-map, right? Yeah.
This is definitely the clip that has raised the most eyebrows. Riley flicks 90
Here's the other thing. Check this out. Check this out. Let me show you something really quick. And Carl does explain this, but this is so insane to me when you look at the bigger picture of it, that like immediately the argument of cheating starts to fall apart. So the argument is that
This is
right
definitely
here,
the
she locks onto someone through the wall, right? And that she locks onto that person, and when she comes around the wall, she's still locked onto them, and she hits them. So like, let's watch what actually happens right here. Let me run it back a little bit. 1 second.
Hoping so hard, they said, you know there's a mini-map, right? Yeah.
Okay. I want to slow-mo this part. We're going to slow this one down. I'm getting ahead of Carl on this one, but it just, once I've kind of seen like the bigger picture and I've analyzed these clips more closely, it really starts to fall apart, the allegation of like cheating or whatever. Look at this shit, right?
This is definitely
So she snaps through the wall to the enemy, and she's supposedly still locked on to the enemy as she's coming around the wall, right? But the enemy she hits is coming from the right. How is that enemy behind the wall and she's locked onto it? Meanwhile, she runs towards the right, and as soon as she pops from around the wall, the enemy's running from the right direction. That doesn't make any sense when you take a closer look at it. But anyway, like I said, I'm kind of getting ahead of Carl here, but I just couldn't help myself. It's just, when you slowly frame for frame analyze the clips, the arguments really start to fall apart.
This is definitely the clip that has raised the most eyebrows. Riley flicks 90 degrees to the left and shoots at a rock, and then when she strafes around, an enemy is there. Tectone is correct that the code for this is the minimap, and indeed, a player is visible on the minimap in that location. So based on the minimap, it would make sense to snap to that direction.
They perfectly tracked their verticality, their horizontal degree, and
Okay, the whole like, they tracked their verticality and horizontal degree. That gets even funnier when, as like Carl shows later on in this, like theoretically speaking, if like the character, there really was an enemy where RileyCS locked on, the ground is dropped below Riley's position. Like there's actually like a dip, the rock goes up and then it dips further down from Riley's position. So like, in order to lock directly on both from the horizontal and vertical degree, like Riley would have to be aiming down because there's a slope behind the rock where the enemy was supposedly at. So again, it doesn't make sense.
trace them through unless they have x-ray vision, you can't see someone through a rock. You can't trace their movement through a rock.
Yeah, but like you've got to admit, I mean, we can clearly see what's sus about this, right? Is that he locks on to this player.
Gotta love how Asmongold referred to her as he. See, this is what I mean when I talk about like a lot of like transphobia surrounding this particular like allegation or whatever, and people are like really like letting their masks slip here. Like, he's literally referring to her as he, and you know he didn't do that by accident. That's intentional. That's fucking intentional.
Player that's behind the wall.
It definitely appears sus. But what I don't understand is why people say that Riley locked onto an enemy she couldn't see through a wall and tracked them perfectly. This is an oxymoron. Not because it's impossible that Riley could be tracking someone through a wall, but because it's impossible to tell. If you can't see what is behind the rock, you cannot tell if anything is being locked onto, nor can you tell if anything is being tracked. You cannot have it both ways. If we try to do a forensic investigation into what Riley was possibly aiming at, we find there was no one there. This is where she snaps to, which is to the left of the C, and when she peeks to the corner, the enemies are all on the right.
See, that's what I'm talking about. Supposedly, she locked onto an enemy through the rock, but then when she runs around the rock, she kind of like pivots that way and runs around the rock. You don't see an enemy where she was aiming at. You see two enemies running in from the right. So how can she be locked onto an enemy behind the rocks when she runs around the rocks and they're coming in from the right? It doesn't make sense.
There is definitely a downed enemy in the direction Riley snapped to the left of the C, but not only can we not determine if the player was downed at that moment, but the verticality appears to be way off.
Here is where Riley was aiming.
This is the part I was talking about where the height difference, right? So Riley's like way up here, and then you can scale over the rock, and then rather than coming to the same level that Riley's at, it dips lower. Watch this.
Approximately around here. And if we go in that straight line, where
see,
do
it
we
dips
end up?
down. The ground is lower than where Riley is at. So if Riley is aiming through the rock straight ahead, how is she locked onto an enemy that's supposedly behind the rock if the ground dips down significantly on the other side of the rock? Make it make sense.
We end up right here. And if you look, this is around the area that's enemy 4 died.
Yeah, there's no way she locked on. She just took a wild guess running and gunning because she did exactly what aim trainers are doing. What aim trainers do is they're keeping close tabs on the mini-map to see directions of the enemy. They're taking out the enemies they see in front of them, and they're quickly, with a quick wrist motion, snapping in the direction of other enemies on the mini-map. That's all they're doing. They're seeing that there's enemies in this direction on the mini-map, so I'm going to snap that way. I might not necessarily aim right at them when I get there, but I'll get relatively close. And it's possible there may be an object in the way when I snap that way, but it's very instinctive with aim trainers. You snap the wrist in the direction of the enemies on the minimap. And that's all she's doing.
If Riley did snap to this downed enemy, she seems to be aiming way too high. Even when Riley peeks out from the rock, she isn't.
Because like if you've ever watched a competitive aim trainer play, and I've watched a few. In fact, I have a friend that just got into aim training and they've been doing it themselves and they'll send me clips of their gameplay. What they'll do is they'll snap in the direction of the next target, and most times they won't land perfectly on the target with the snap. So what you'll see is like they'll snap in the direction of the target. Like let's say my finger's the target and this is the direction of their aim. They'll snap in the direction of it and they won't get right on it. So then they'll make a minor course correction to get the target. The point of the snap is not to get directly on the target. It's to get close to the target. So they have to make little minor micro corrections in order to get on target. Does that make sense?
Locked onto anybody, and the closest enemy to her crosshair was moving, so we don't really know exactly where he was.
So that's funny too. Look at that. Look at that close-up inspection. The claim is that she was perfectly locked onto an enemy. Look at this frame right here. There's no enemy in sight right there. It's not until she completely moves
and the closest
around
enemy
the rock that you see the enemy, and even when you see the enemy, she's not locked onto it.
To her crosshair was moving, so we don't really know exactly where he
Tectone is an idiot. I mean, yeah, true. Tectone has always been an idiot.
was. The fact that an enemy was close to the crosshair when Riley peeked makes it seem like she was locked on the entire time, but unfortunately, we really have no way of knowing. At best, what we can say for certain is that she snapped to the direction of a player. We cannot say if anything was locked onto, and we cannot say if anything was tracked perfectly. This means it's up to you whether you think it's plausible that Riley could snap to that direction so well.
I don't think so. Because, like, as you frame for frame analyze these clips, you start to really quickly see the aimbot arguments fall apart. Because if you see, like, aimbotters, like, it's so close. Even if they, like, some aimbot tools will have the option to, like, make it simulate not perfect aim. But even with that, you can tell if you know what you're looking for. And I'm just not seeing the behavior of an aimbot here at all.
well based
This is the behavior of an aim trainer.
on the enemy's location on the minimap. Personally, I don't find this to be that crazy. Riley turned to the direction of someone on the minimap, and there were a total of 4 enemies behind that rock. One here, one here, one here, and the 4th is the downed enemy on the left. So with 4 enemies behind that rock, it isn't shocking that her crosshair ended up in the general vicinity of one of them.
Snap to a rock, although I will say before, if you go back, I just want to break this down. They're on the radar right here at the bottom left. They're on the fucking radar, okay? So I understand why they snap there, but I feel like if you're shooting straight, you're looking there, you're not looking at the radar, so how they know exactly where to snap to is kind of crazy.
But again, they don't snap directly onto the enemy. Even if, hypothetically speaking, they were aiming at the enemy that happened to be downed when they ran around the rock, they still weren't aiming. If anything, they were aiming too far up. Because again, there's a slope behind the rock that goes downward. So wouldn't they need to aim down for it to be like a true aimbot lock-on? Of course, they wouldn't be aiming slightly up like that.
This is a reasonable thing to bring up. Is it really possible to simultaneously aim on an enemy this precisely and keep track of the minimap? Well, in this case, Riley didn't need to. Though you would never know this just based on the montage, because the edit cuts the clip right when she engages. But if you look at the original footage, the enemy that appears on the minimap is spotted and on the minimap for at least 8 seconds before the clip even starts.
So again, if you refer to the full stream VOD, which is what like Carl did in this situation, you can see that she was aware of that enemy position long before the start of the clip. 8 full seconds before the start of the clip. So she already knew the enemy was over there before she snapped to their direction.
Riley knew the person was there well ahead of time, and in fact, she could see there were multiple people heading to that position. Snapping to that direction was completely logical here.
Is that right, Riley? Having a great gaming chair and good FPS can allow you to snap back 180 degrees.
I always laugh with Tectone. He speaks so confidently as if he knows what the fuck he's talking about, and half the time he has no fucking clue. This guy is such a fucking clown.
And then trace an opponent through a wall for...
I'll never understand on social media how people this stupid get a following. It's so bizarre.
8 shots before...
Like, you have people like Asmongold, who has, like, millions of, like, supporters. And, like, this guy literally lives in a garbage heap. Like, his house is a disaster zone. He's got, like, literal cockroaches crawling on him as he streams. And for some reason, people look up to this guy as, like, a pillar of, like, wisdom or something. He's just a fucking loser.
Before you realize, oh, your bullets aren't hitting, and then you go, oh, oopsie doodly. Yeah.
But if the enemy wasn't visible, why did Riley shoot? Well, it's because she was already shooting. The best clips are
That's the other thing is, like, nobody really pays much attention to that part of the clip. So the way a lot of, like, aimbots work, if you've ever, like, seen somebody get accused of, like, aimbotting in the past, is when you start firing, that's when the aimbot kicks in and locks onto the next, like, closest target. But that doesn't happen here. It's not like, you know, Riley kills this person, lets off the trigger, and then hits the trigger to allow the aimbot to snap to the next closest enemy. Riley is run and gunning it. They're firing, and when this guy goes down, they continue to fire while snapping to the next, like, person that they're snapping to. Watch closely.
Why did Riley shoot? Well, it's because she was already shooting.
You see
the
that?
Best clips are the
They never let go of the trigger. They were just run and gunning it as they were snapping to the next person, right?
ones where you don't stop shooting. You just switch from one target to the next and try to get as many kills as you can in a single magazine.
Why? What did Carl say? Think how dumb the average guy is, then remember half the population are dumber than that. I wasn't talking about Carl, I was talking about Tectone. Tectone's a fucking clown.
Without stopping. It's basically spray and pray. In this case, The Rock is...
You think I would shit on my homeboy like that? Me and Carl are homies. Like, we go way back or whatever, right? Like, I might be critical of them with the way they handled the Billy Mitchell case, but I'm not gonna, like, outright fucking shit on them. Like, oh my god, Carl Jobs is a fucking dumbass. It's like, no, when it came to my criticisms, like, of, like, Carl, when it came to the Billy Mitchell thing, it's like, yeah, you know, I disagree with the way he handled it or whatever, but I don't think he's a bad guy or whatever. I just think that maybe he got a little ahead of himself and made some bad calls, and the whole like blaming Billy for what happened to Apollo was a bad move. But like, no, like, I'm not gonna shit on like my friend like that. Like, what? No, I was talking about Tectone.
Is more than anything a red herring. It was
Tectone's a fucking idiot.
already a flick to an enemy completely off screen, so the rock was inconsequential. Clip farmers do not check to see if their aim is perfect before shooting. They shoot first and hope they hit something. 9 times out of 10, they don't, or they die trying. But of course, you'll never see those clips uploaded to Twitter. We also never see this type of instant snapping to enemies through walls in any other clips, and no one has been able to produce another example of this happening, despite Riley streaming many hours every day. I would posit that if this instant snapping to enemies through walls was a feature of an aimbot, you would see it happen at least one more time. I haven't seen an explanation as to why it only happens a single time in this entire montage or in any stream. Even the people who seem to be the most interested in proving Riley cheated.
Tectone is an idiot, but he makes tons of money being an idiot, enabling hate. It's a bit infuriating. Yeah, it's really kind of shitty that the worst people in these spaces are the people that get the most like attention and get the most success. It's really kind of a bummer, and it can be a bit demoralizing at times, like demotivating, but it kind of is what it is. There's nothing really you can really do about it. People just naturally gravitate to really toxic, shitty people.
Disagree on how she did it. The channel Call of Shame, who seems to be very knowledgeable on aimbots, and to be honest a lot more knowledgeable than most people I see talking on this matter, claims that the snap to the rock was not cheating at all, and that the aimbot is only activated when Riley shoots and the target is within a certain field of view.
The aimbot didn't get a lock. Let me explain why this happened. The aimbot only works if the enemy is inside its field of view. Now, because the enemy was outside the FOV, it didn't lock on, even though he is firing his weapon. The snapping isn't the cheat.
Jeez, even the fucking, like, person who's technically defending them throws out the casual transphobia, referring to her as he. Jeez.
The aimbot only takes over once the weapon fires. In this clip...
So even somebody who's like an aimbot expert is here saying that, like, no, snapping with aimbot doesn't work that way.
Watch the first 5 bullets. They all miss completely, because the enemy is strafing left and the aimbot's field of view isn't on the target. That forces Riley to miss his shots. On the 6th shot, the target moves into the field of view, and that's when the aimbot's micro-adjustment takes over. I mean, it doesn't get any more blatant than this. If you can't see aimbot by now, then you are deliberately lying to yourself.
So it's interesting that this person, who's supposedly an expert on aimbot, they're pointing out that, like, some clips they believe to be aimbot, but like the one that everybody thinks is super damning with like aiming behind the rock or whatever, that they're pointing out that that one doesn't appear to be like aimbot. Why are they saying his? Because they're throwing down the casual transphobia. That's why.
In that last clip, he shows the aimbot supposedly working, but
like it's very public knowledge at this point that like RileyCS is trans. So I'm sorry, but I'm not going to entertain like, you know, I can understand in like in some situations people might hear Riley's voice and think, okay, you know, that person's probably like male or whatever, if they just don't know RileyCS, and if there wasn't like a bunch of like huge coverage of this, like it wasn't all over the fucking internet. But at this point, it's pretty well known that RileyCS is trans. So if you're referring to RileyCS as he or him or something like that, like, I'm just going to call it what it is. I believe it's casual transphobia because it's very public knowledge at this point that Riley's trans and they identify as she, her.
But when I view the actual footage and examine the next enemies in the exact same clip, the aimbot seems to behave differently. Riley is shooting here, and the enemy is within the field of view, but the crosshair drifts off target. So either she
see that this behavior isn't consistent with an aimbot. Not even close.
Is toggling
even if you have like the aimbot tools enabled that try to simulate a means of not looking like aimbot, like sometimes the aimbot will intentionally aim a little bit off so that it doesn't appear to be an aimbot, like it tries to fake people out into thinking you're not using aimbot. Even with that, it doesn't mimic the behavior of an aimbot.
the aimbot between enemies, or this analysis seems to be cherry-picked. Call of Shame has also said this particular clip is both not cheating and also obviously cheated. Here he shows the aimbot supposedly working in this clip, which is the first clip in Riley's montage. But previously he had said the exact same clip wasn't cheating, and was inserted into the montage to give defenders plausible deniability.
Breaking down the first part of this montage, you'll see he's snapping all over the place. At first glance, this creates the illusion that he's cheating. I mean, you'd think that, right? When you slow it down, you can see...
The avatar looks like a her even. I used to think that, like, a lot of times, like, if I saw someone who with a very feminine, like, avatar, then, like, I would automatically assume, like, if they had, like, a masculine-sounding voice, that they were probably trans. But that's also not a good rule of thumb either. Best rule of thumb is to, like, you know, either ask them or like check if they have their like pronouns listed. Because like, for example, there's a creator known as NekoCirrus, who's like a leftist content creator, and they use a very feminine avatar, but they identify as like a cisgender male. And apparently, like in their case, the reason they use the avatar they use is it's like an inter-community meme sort of thing. So in that case, I would imagine like a lot of people at first glance would think like NekoCirrus is like trans, but they're not. Even when I first met them, I thought that they were trans, but they're not. So that's not always like a go-to indicator that someone is trans. Like they may have a masculine sounding voice, but they have a feminine avatar. Yeah, like Cirrus is like a prime example of someone who identifies as a cisgender male. Unless it's changed since the last time I talked to them. I'm not sure. But the last time I talked to them, as far as I knew, they identified as a cisgender male.
You can see that this person is...
I was just thinking of Cirrus and his big titty cat girl avatar. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. I feel like I need to show you guys an example so you guys are not confused about what I'm talking about. Let me go ahead and bring up Cirrus's channel. Cirrus is great. Yeah, I don't get a chance to like catch their content as often as I used to. But yeah, NekoCirrus is great. I love their stuff. Let's see. Cirrus. Let me pull up a piece of their content. Here we go. So at first glance, if you didn't know Cirrus, you'd probably think that this is a trans woman, but no, this is a cis man. See what I mean? Let me see.
But instead of that, you get to witness this sadness. Just replace the sounds of DK64 with the sounds of Darude.
So yeah, this is a cisgender man using a very feminine like avatar. But yeah.
Person is actually snapping past the targets and correcting their own bad aim. They're snapping to nothing. And no, that's not cheating. Cheaters often include clips like this in their montages so that absolute
true.
morons...
Actually, I didn't notice that. Let's run that clip back. They snap to a literally just a blank space on the wall.
Aim. They're snapping to nothing.
See, there's like nothing there. How is that consistent with aimbotting when they're literally just like shooting at a wall?
And no, that's not cheating. Cheaters often include clips like this in their montages so that absolute morons can try to break it down and say, see, he's not cheating.
Pointing out contradictions isn't proof that Riley isn't cheating, and Call of Shame could be correct that Riley is using a sophisticated aimbot of some kind. Apparently he is working on software to detect aimbots in Battlefield 6, which I'm very interested to see. However, at best, this just highlights that people's opinions are changing from day to day, and at worst, it shows that people are making claims too quickly without adequate investigation. Which
is common on the internet. We see this all the time where somebody will make some like snap judgment about someone without having actual evidence to back up their judgment. I've even experienced this myself where there's been situations where people have made assumptions about me based on something I tweeted or someone I followed on social media or, you know, something along those lines. Like, I'll give a perfect example. There's a content creator who's kind of like a meme in the social media space known as Fuda Loving Cockmaster. Their Twitter @ is Sheenus Respecter. And I follow this person. And there were a lot of people who saw me following this person, and they assumed that because I followed this person, this was proof that I'm a chaser. And they said that if like members of like the trans community ever found out that I was following this person, that I would get canceled for being a chaser. Meanwhile, I met this person in the trans community. they were friends with people who were a part of the trans community, and they were very much a part of various online trans communities. But because I followed this person, they made the assumption that that was proof that I was a chaser. Yeah.
Even the cheating expert
As a trans man, I think that's funny as fuck. And so did many of the trans people who associated with them. They thought it was funny. They some of them found it a little bit endearing that he was like honest about his feelings. Instead of trying to like be a chaser, but trying to deny it, he was just outright like, yeah, I love having sex with trans women, and I don't give a fuck what anybody thinks about it. Like, they found it kind of endearing in some weird kind of way, but whatever.
experts don't agree on what
That's
cheating
the funniest thing, is watching, like, you know, people who aren't part of queer communities comment on what they think about queer communities, because there's so many things that, like, it just doesn't make sense to, like, people who aren't part of these communities. Meanwhile, that's like the norm in these communities, and they just don't understand it. It's a prime example of people commenting on things that they have no idea what the fuck they're talking about.
cheat is being used, or which parts of the clips are cheated, we obviously have issues. People also pointed out that after the rock flick, Riley's crosshair
Why would they hate that guy? He calls himself the Sheenus respecter. He is a respecter of the Sheenus.
jumps extremely quickly. But again, it has also been mixed in with misinformation.
And once they get this kill, it snaps again. Right to that guy right there. You guys see that little snappage?
For example, many people claim this snap is locking onto an enemy, when it clearly jumps to nothing.
True! She kills the enemy. Sorry, I didn't mean that. She kills the enemy off to the side there, and she snaps like to try and go towards that enemy, but she snaps too far and aims at this random piece of debris.
I have seen technical explanations as to how this can happen, and apparently players can do it at will. If the snap went to an enemy, I think it would be a lot more dubious than it is. But given that it didn't, and the phenomenon is reproducible, I don't see how this is any proof of cheating. Another clip that was seen as proof of cheating.
Oh, this one's crazy. This one's crazy. I remember seeing this one, and when I first saw it, before I publicly commented on the situation at all, I thought, oh yeah, that looks like she's cheating, because she's aiming at a target and killing a target she can't even see. And then when I saw Carl's explanation for this, I was like, oh my god. Like, he full on debunked this one. Watch this.
Cheating was this clip in Battlefield 5, where Riley flicks to players who appear to be invisible due to smoke.
Yeah, this isn't a hack. Somehow Riley knew in that smoke that there
Oh my god, of course it would be fucking Gundam. This fucking guy.
was someone in it and they were laying down. You can't see it, but Riley's God-given transcenses that transcend being human. At this point, it's a
God-given trans senses. So, okay, I don't think I need to point out how this is like clearly like transphobic rhetoric here, but okay.
huge LARP hiding behind the queer community. We're watching someone literally use cheats and hacks and go, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. You're a transphobe.
And when I viewed this clip on Twitter, it
I mean, when you're really making jokes referencing the fact that they're trans, like, yeah, it's understandable that people would come to the conclusion that you're transphobic, dude.
made no sense to me. The best excuse I had heard was that sometimes people get lucky, and I can understand why this would also cause a lot of people to think Riley is cheating. However, the real explanation is
Gundam is like nails on a chalkboard. I hate to admit it, but there was actually a time when I used to watch that guy. Like, I actually enjoyed some of his content, and I don't know why. Like, I'm not even just saying this to try and, like, I don't know, virtue signal or whatever, but, like, there's just something about it that, like, I just don't understand why I used to enjoy this guy's content. Maybe I had, like, partially fallen down some, like, rabbit hole or something where I bought into, like, a lot of this, like, anti-woke shit at some point, but, like, yeah, I used to watch Gundam's content, and I used to actually enjoy it. And I just don't fucking get. Maybe he's just gone a little bit more mask off in recent years, and that's why it's kind of like a turnoff to me. And he was a little bit more subtle with it in the past. I don't fucking know. But, like, yeah, I can't stand his content anymore.
is far more simple. When I view this clip on Twitter, I can't see an enemy here, but the Twitter version is terrible quality, entirely compressed. Luckily, Riley still has the original video in high quality and sent it to me, and when I view the original, the enemy is clearly visible.
Holy shit. So, this is something I didn't even think about when I saw people calling out this clip initially. It's the fact that It's true. Anybody who's ever uploaded video to Twitter knows how heavy the compression is on Twitter. Like, I showed a Twitter video on stream earlier, and you can see that the quality of the video is just ass. Let me see if I can find, is it this tweet? We were doing a segment on Boblax earlier, and I showed a clip from another content creator's video. And, like, you could just see, I'm not going to play the audio.
Boblax
showing the quality. You can see that the quality is like this is a full 1080p video on YouTube. And you can see how it's kind of like blurry and hazy here. And that's because Twitter's compression is just dog shit. Like, Twitter's like compression, whatever compression, algorithm they're using or whatever, it's just ass. So, like, it really does make any video you upload. You could upload like a full 4K quality clip to Twitter and it'll look like ass after like Twitter compresses it down. But yeah, if you look at this is the full quality clip, and the enemy that she was aiming at is clearly visible there. Whereas on the Twitter version, you can't see because it's too blurry.
And when you see the enemy, you realize the flick wasn't even accurate, and it took multiple shots before Riley adjusted. So when viewing the actual footage, you see that not only can you see the enemy clearly, but the snap was completely off target. Both narratives surrounding this clip are simply untrue. In truth, the fact that so much of this debate has been happening on Twitter is probably causing way more problems than otherwise necessary. Twitter doesn't even offer frame advance on its videos, and the video quality is always far worse than reality.
It literally looks like, for the Twitter version, it literally looks like nothing is there at all. And then on the original high quality version, you can clearly see the enemy there. That's crazy.
So a lot of the time, it's very hard to tell what happened. I've seen so many comments from people saying that Riley perfectly snaps onto enemies.
It's crazy, bro, because some parts look insane, like this one. It's perfect.
But when I view the footage myself and slow it down, that's almost never the case. There is usually an initial flick that misses the target, and then there is a micro adjustment. This has been the standard technique for switching targets for years.
The core technique involves a flick, a fast, explosive, snappy motion usually performed with the forearm that produces a straight line in the direction of the intended target. This rigid snap is followed immediately after by a microcorrection, a much more narrow...
See how we talked about that earlier? When the aim training gamers do that flick, their goal, as nice as it would be, to hit on target with the flick, the goal is not to get right on the target. The goal is to get as close to the target as possible so that you can use a little micro correction to then get on the target and hit the target. It's kind of like, if I could use an analogy, when you're golfing, like if you're playing golf, when you tee off, like the goal is to get as close to the hole as you can possibly get. And then when you're on the green, you start putting as a form of like, in regards to golf, that's like the micro corrections, right? You're putting your way towards the hole. And it's something very similar with like aim training. You're flicking to get close to the target, and then you're micro correcting to actually get on the target. It would be nice in golf if you could hit a hole in one every single hole that you approach, but that's unrealistic. That's not going to happen. And the same goes for like aim training. It would be nice if you could flick in the direction of a target and get, bullseye on point every single time, but it's not going to happen. And that's why the micro corrections exist. Does that make sense?
And smoother adjustment to correct either the overflick or underflick distance away from the target. The microcorrection is followed by the target confirmation, a very brief, almost instantaneous check to see that you are on target and can take the shot. This is the foundation of static clicking, and it is what allowed Bardoz to reach such high accuracy thresholds.
In response to the fact that Riley usually misses her initial flick, people will say that you can insert inaccuracy into aimbots to mask their impact. The channel Lincoln Margison shows a great example of an entirely automated aimbot that appears almost identical to a human playing. So this is certainly possible. Essentially, the argument is that Riley missing isn't evidence of not using an aimbot, because you can make an aimbot miss on purpose. Or at the very least, you can make it randomly target different parts of the enemy to vary its effect. Recently, the player Shimmy was exposed for using an aimbot because it consistently snapped to the same part of the enemy's body, and in his case the snap was very obvious, as was the inhuman tracking. In Riley's case, there doesn't appear to be any rhyme or rhythm to where the aimbot is targeting, and it often drifts off target completely. If it's true that aimbots are sophisticated enough to vary their targets and insert this amount of unpredictability, I would love to see Riley's play replicated.
See, that's the thing. So, like, even if you wanted to make the argument that she was using, like, the feature in, like, aimbots that allows it to try and simulate natural play from a human being to try and allow people to brush away allegations of, like, aimbotting, her behavior with her aim isn't even consistent with aimbots that utilize that feature. Does that make sense?
Ultimately, while it could be possible that Riley is using an aimbot, the evidence presented so far hasn't been strong enough to convince me of anything. I would never say she isn't cheating, that's always possible.
I think what's crazy about this too is the fact that what would be the incentive for her to cheat anyway? Because prior to this controversy, she was not a big content creator. She was not a very notable content creator. Now, she has blown up as a result of this controversy and, like, lots of people showing her support. Now she's pulling, like, insane numbers. But prior to this, it's like, what would be the incentive for her to cheat in the first place? I guess you could make an argument that, like, if people saw her insane clips, that would bring her growth. But, like, typically when you see somebody who's, like, aimbotting, it's typically somebody who's already established and they've hit, like, a peak in terms of their competitive abilities, and they start using aimbots to maintain their edge, you know, over other players. Not somebody who's cheating to try and gain an edge. Does that make sense?
Possible, but given how many misconceptions there are floating around...
That's not to say that there aren't, like, smaller people in the creator space who cheat. I'm sure there are. But more often than not, it's like a bigger person who's using cheating to try and maintain their position in the community as opposed to try and gain a position in the community. Because it seems like smaller people are more scrutinized when it comes to allegations of cheating as opposed to, like, bigger people.
Around, I don't trust much at this point in time. Riley has been streaming many hours each day and showing Task Manager upon request, so if she is using something, she is hiding it very well. There is also a ton of circumstances.
That's the other thing too, she openly, like, if people ask her, can you show your Task Manager so we can look for cheats? She's, like, openly willing to, like, show the Task Manager. Now, some people have pointed out it is possible to hide your, like, cheats, like rename the executable or something to be something that, like, doesn't look like an aimbot. But even though that way, there's ways to spot it. So it's not, like, fully foolproof or whatever. But yeah.
Circumstantial evidence being thrown around, like the fact that Riley was banned on Twitch for 1 day, which could be due to being mass reported. On the flip side,
that's more likely, honestly. Like, you'll see a lot of these social media platforms, if somebody's getting mass reported for something, like, they'll get hit, even if it's a valid, like, you know, ban or not.
Side, Riley hasn't been banned in-game, which could be used as evidence that she isn't cheating, especially given that according to their anti-cheat team, they have already prevented over 300,000 attempts to cheat already. Riley has been banned in the past on Twitch, and the reason given by Twitch was due to cheating. This might be legitimate. Riley may have cheated in...
That's another thing too, though. Like, we don't have the footage that caused them to get banned that last time, so it's possible that was, like, an illegitimate ban as well. We don't know for sure without seeing the footage. I've seen a lot of people point to this previous ban as proof that they're cheating. But, like, if they're an aim trainer, right, and, like, their gameplay looks a way that seems to suggest to some people that they're cheating, wouldn't it be possible that they could be mass flagged for cheating again, even though it wasn't valid? So even that isn't necessarily proof of cheating.
In some way, in some game in the past. Twitch doesn't provide any specific details, so it's up to you whether or not you believe that Twitch is an authority on cheating, and if this ban affects your opinion on current events.
That's the problem with, like, mass flagging is, like, you know, if Twitch gets a 1Z or 2Z report on a streamer for a certain behavior, they're going to investigate it and confirm it before they flag someone down. Now, sometimes people get flagged down wrongfully anyway, but I would be willing to say at least 8 times out of 10, if there's like a 1Z, 2Z report against someone at Twitch is actually going to put forth the effort to investigate to see if, you know, the report is legitimate before taking action against the account. However, when you've got tens or hundreds or even thousands of people reporting a single account, A lot of times Twitch or YouTube or any social media platform is just going to say, okay, we're getting like a large influx of reports here. This is probably legitimate. And they're just going to do it to save themselves time having to investigate. So that's the problem with like mass flagging. That's why it's so heavily scrutinized in creator spaces, because it can be abused to take down people for illegitimate reasons.
I think the biggest determining factor on whether or not you think Riley is cheating will be based on whether or not you think this type of aim is possible. And personally, I can say that after looking into the AIM community over the past few months, Riley's clips aren't that insane for someone who specializes in AIM. And when you consider that these clips are just a 1-minute highlight reel of a stream that lasted hours and hours, it's not that shocking. Matty, the aimer who won Red Bull's Ready Check competition, who proved in a LAN event that his aim is far superior to esports pros, who is far and away the highest ranked aimer in the world, believes that these clips aren't anything out of the ordinary. When the best aimer in the world, and possibly of all time, believes that Riley isn't cheating, this should give you pause. Of course, this is an appeal to authority, and doesn't prove Riley isn't cheating. But it's a good indication that things might not be as clear-cut as they seem. The AIM community is relatively young, having only really developed in the past few years, so it's understandable that most people don't know much about it.
Yeah, that's the other thing, right? Is the AIM training community is like super niche at the moment. It's not like, you know, in the early days of speedrunning, it was a very small number of people who engaged in speedruns, but now the speedrunning community is a very large online competitive scene. So like in the past, you would see a lot of allegations of cheating against speedrunners, even though like a lot of the times people just didn't understand them. And I feel like, you know, the AIM training community is going through like a similar experience where, because it's such a niche community, people aren't super familiar with how things work in those communities yet. And therefore there's a lot of things people are spotting and seeing as like, oh, that looks like it's cheating, when in reality it's pretty common fare for like an AIM trainer.
And if it's anything like the speedrunning community, I know from experience that when a niche community doing crazy things suddenly gets massive amounts of mainstream attention, there's going to be a lot of people who simply don't believe it. And that's not only reasonable and understandable, it's to be expected. I won't say if Riley is cheating or not, I'll just say that I'm not convinced she is. What I do know with a high degree of certainty is that the loudest voices surrounding this drama seem to have massive gaps in their knowledge. Yeah. And I predict in a few years...
I think that... I don't want to phrase this. I think that there's a very large portion of the people calling RileyCS a cheater here do not understand aimbotting and how aimbotters' strategies are different than traditional FPS players. But I also think that there's a very loud vocal portion of the community that their motives aren't necessarily from people who care so much about cheating. I think that there is a large portion of the vocal critics here that are just transphobic, and they're just trying to kick a trans creator while they're down. That's kind of where my position on this lies. I'm kind of the mindset that, is it possible that RileyCS is cheating here? Yeah, it's possible. But I think Carl presents some good enough arguments here to suggest to me that I'm not 100% convinced that they're cheating. I think it's more likely that they're not cheating and they're just playing with the strategies of an AIM trainer as opposed to the strategies of a competitive FPS player. That's what I think. But is it possible they're still cheating? Yeah, sure. It's absolutely possible that she's still cheating. I just don't think so based on the evidence that's been presented here.
As the AIM community becomes more widely understood, we might...
Oh, in the chat says there's massive gaps in Tectone and Asmon's knowledge in general. Their fame is way overhyped. Yeah, true. True.
To look back at these clips and realize they really aren't anything special at all. Thank you so much for watching, you legends. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video.
Okay, so that's what Carl had to say on it. Yeah, I'm not convinced that they're cheating. I'm not going to completely rule out the possibility. It's definitely possible that she's cheating, but given the evidence presented here, I'm less inclined to believe so. I think it's more likely that she's just got a different skill set than your more traditional FPS player, which again is like the skill set of an AIM trainer as opposed to a competitive FPS player. And I do think that there are a lot of people whose motives here for calling out RileyCS has less to do with being concerned about people cheating in FPS games and has more to do with a transphobic narrative. Not everybody. I don't think everybody who believes that RileyCS is a cheater is transphobic. But there's a very vocal part of the community that's calling them out, that I do believe that is the case. But that's kind of where I stand on it.